Hi friends, I'm Abby and welcome back to my channel. Today I am filming a Should You Read the Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne. The first book being The Shadow of the Gods, then we have The Hunger of the Gods, and then The Fury of the Gods. And so should you be reading this series? Short answer, yes. But I will give you a long answer with detailed thoughts on the plot, characters, world, and sort of reasons why I think you should read it, or reasons why it might not work for you, and why this series could potentially be a new favourite or one that you should be avoiding. This is John Gwynne's latest trilogy. It has recently concluded with The Fury of the Gods coming out at the end of October. So the first book, and where do we start? It is a multi-perspective story and it's set in a Nordic-inspired world. So there used to be gods in this world, and each god had an affiliation with a different creature, whether that's the dragon, the wolf, the rat, the snake, the boar potentially, or many different animals. But they are now dead and long gone, and they're part of the history and legends of the world. I mean, people know that they existed because some of the cities are founded within the body of the great snake. Sort of the magic as well is revolved around them, and you have people that come from the heritage of these gods, and they are looked down upon now within the world. So it's got this really interesting sort of lore and history and world that we get introduced to. And then we have our cast of characters. So 3 main perspectives in this first book, one of them being Orca, who at the beginning of the book, she gets sort of thrust off onto this mission and journey to rescue her son who has been kidnapped. And it is her going through that and trying to get him back and understanding why he has been taken. We then follow Varg, who is an ex-slave. At the beginning of the book, he is running for his life. He is also seeking some magic ceremony so that he can understand what has happened to his sister, because he believes that she has been murdered. And he enters into this warband called the Bloodsworn, and the journey that they start going on. We then follow Elvar, who is seeking her battle fame. She has been raised by this sort of quite patriarchal society, and she wants to claim her own place in this world. And so she is part of this other warband that is going out, and they are pretty much for hire, and they are going on in the search for some treasure. So we have this cast of characters which seem quite disparate, especially in this first book, but everything does all start to tie together. Those are the sort of perspectives that we get, and they each are experiencing different parts of this world. There is a map, if you like a map, sort of gives you a bit more of like a setting and expectations. So there we are. This is the body of the dead god. And it's a very brutal world. There are some very disgusting creatures that are just out to kill you. So it's beware. You are not safe. You are never safe in this world. It appears that your life is just at risk. I don't think I would last very long in this world. You have to be strong, both mentally and physically, and always on your guard. That you need to be prepared for things to go wrong. And that the world is out to kill you. Whether that's the fauna, flora, people, everything. It's brutal. But this is not a grim, dark series. There are elements of grimness. This is something I wrote down. Grimness of grimdark without the hopelessness of it. That there is always hope throughout this series and through John Gwynne's books as a whole. That he can be brutal, and there can be elements where you are like, that is rather disgusting, that is rather brutal, that is not pleasant. But I think throughout all of his books, the characters, there is hope. There are people to root for, and there is always this sort of desire to do good for some of them, not all of them, but for some of them. So if you feel as though grim dark is too grim and too, I guess, dark for you, or too hopeless, then this definitely has that balance where it is quite war focused, it is quite grim, it is quite bloody, but there is always sort of hope and family and love in it as well. So some of the my strengths, or things that I would say are sort of positives for this and reasons why I think you should be reading this series. I feel as though John Gwynne does a very good job at growing your attachment to the characters, that his character work is done so well, and I think the same applies especially to like The Faithful and the Fallen, where you do grow attached to the characters, that they are like such a cast and they are so very different. And although this first book we're mostly following the heroes, in the second and third book we follow both the heroes and the villains. And so you can sort of start to sympathise or empathise a little bit with the villains, because you are seeing their point of view, and at some point you're like, oh, I hate you, and at other points you're like, okay, I can sort of understand why you're feeling that way, and sort of the different moralities that go on between characters, because we're not all good and we're not all bad, but there are definitely heroes and villains within this. And then the world and the lore, I've spoken about it. I really like the way that the world and the lore has been crafted with these dead gods that are rising, and the way that that impacts the world and the difference and the society as well that we are presented with, that there is lots of oppression, and the way that society treats people that come from the blood of these dead gods, and sort of that understanding and the hardships that these characters are going through, and how we treat people, and knowing, and sort of the characters realizing that everybody is human and should be treated with more compassion. I think John Gwynne does a very good job at writing battle scenes. They are a forte of his. They have been throughout his other series as well, that he does a very good job at battle scenes. And I think that's one of the strengths of having this as a multi-perspective story. And the way that John Gwynne structures his books is that some of the chapters are quite short, which helps with your pacing, that there is a constant like desire to keep turning the pages because of these short chapters. But then in a battle scene, it will mean that you are constantly flitting from like one aspect of the battle to an aspect over here, to one over here, and back again. And so it feels as though you're seeing this battle from a variety of perspectives, and each character is seeing something slightly different and interpreting things differently, and the different objectives of the characters in this battle. So I think he does that really, really well, and that also keeps your pace up, because you're like, I've got to know what's going to happen and who's going to survive these scenes. And on that, I think he does a very good job knowing that this world is quite brutal and dark, that not everybody is going to survive. I know I said that it's not hopeless. There is definitely hope running through the series, but John Gwynne is not scared of killing characters. He's not scared of killing characters perspective characters. He's not scared of killing people off. He does that quite willingly, and that's a theme throughout his books, that he will willingly kill people off. So there is this bittersweet feeling that I get when I read John Gwynne's books, because I always feel satisfied, and it always feels realistic, because you can't expect for characters to go through this and for them all to survive. So it's like a bittersweet, realistic deaths, and those moments he manages very well in a very sort of touching way as well, and seeing how the characters that remain deal with that trauma, which then brings me on to sort of the like twists and turns and cliffhangers that he does. I think he does that very well in terms of with the short chapters and the pacing, that there are different twists and turns in the way that the stories are constructed, also in the way that the story, each book ends, that there are some cliffhangers, which he has done in his other series as well, that there can be some quite brutal cliffhangers. So a good reason for you to get into this now is that you have all of them, and you don't have to sit on a cliffhanger, because I had to sit at the end of The Hunger of the Gods on that cliffhanger. So I think he does that really well to keep you turning those pages. And then, as I touched on, I think the pacing is generally done quite well throughout his books. Okay, so those are my strengths. In terms of some of the weaknesses, because got to find the balance. As I said, battle scenes, which I've talked about the highlights of those, but I know that battle scenes do not work for everybody. I know that they don't. So if you don't like battle scenes, this probably is not the series for you, because there are quite a lot of battle scenes throughout John Gwynne's books. And if you spend your time in battle scenes sort of skimming them and just going, yeah, they're fighting, then this is not going to be the series for you, because they are so much of a focal point of the series. There are some characters with some similar names. I did speak about how good his character work is in the attachment that I get to the characters, but I did feel in this series in particular that there were some characters with similar names. I think I might have to put it on the screen, but there was like a Lith and a Leaf, and I was like, one was on the good side, one was on the bad side, and I was like, we've got a few characters here with a Lith and a Leaf and a like they're very similar sort of sounding names, and that wasn't the only one. There was like a Brekka and a Draka, like there are quite a few similar sounding names in this, and potentially that is because it's pulling from a world and a lore and a history where those were the names, where those are the names, but I did find some of the naming conventions a little bit confusing, so one to look out for. Yeah, in the second and third book it does give you a cast of characters, unlike in the first one, so you do have that. So I think there could have been a little bit done with some more character naming differentiation that could cause confusion, although there is a character list, and in the second and the third book there is a reminder of the events that came before, which I think is a very good thing. So that's back on the strengths, is it does give you reminders of the previous books. If you were like me, well, I mean, I did reread, but if it had been a little bit of time in between reading each book. Also, I had some issues with the audiobook. I spoke about this in my wrap up. The first time I read all of these books, I read them physically, but then for my reread in preparation for the third book, I read the first book and the second book with the audiobook, and I struggled a little bit with that. I think the guy has a great voice. I enjoy his voice, but I struggled to concentrate, and I struggled with the maintaining my comprehension of the story and maintaining focus potentially. I don't know if I was zoning out, but I would skip things. I would miss details. So I don't know if these are the best books if you are a predominantly audiobook reader, or to read them for the first time on audiobook because of those issues. I know that everyone interacts with audiobooks differently, but I personally struggled a bit, and I found my enjoyment of this series was heightened when I read it physically. So those were sort of my main thoughts and takeaways of the series. So I've talked about the plot, the strengths, the weaknesses. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend this as a series. I'd say my enjoyment of the series is relatively even throughout the whole trilogy. Like there isn't like a book that I enjoyed predominantly more or predominantly less. That I think they're all quite even. That I think it's a very, very solid series. It concludes well, it's satisfying, that it's got a steady pace throughout, and just the way that it explores both the characters, world, plot, I think it's all quite steady, although the third book is quite battle heavy, so prepare for a lot of battling in this third one. Enjoyed the whole lot. I enjoyed it in comparison to, I've read his other series as well, and I do have a guide to John Gwynne. It is a few years old now. I think it's when The Shadow of the Gods came out that I filmed that one. So back in, I don't know, it's going to be like 3.5 years old now, I think. But I do gush about his other series in that video. So if you need more John Gwynne content from me, there you go. I do still think Faith from the Fallen is my favourite work by him. That's this top 4 books here. That there's something so special about those books and those characters and the events that go on and the twists and turns. Like there is some, I do have such an attachment to that series as my personal favourite, but I do think this is a really solid trilogy and I would strongly recommend it. And John Gwynne as a whole, you need to read John Gwynne. Those are my thoughts. Let me know how you felt about this series or John Gwynne as a whole. If you have any recommendations for me for books I should read next, or for books that I should read if I like John Gwynne, because I do, things that could compare and live up to this, then please let me know. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my future videos. Bye!